Good afternoon, everybody. So I met someone who's a really nice guy today. We just had a few minutes to catch up. Mark, you can come on up. My thought is I just don't know how he's here. Like, I don't know. And just from a bandwidth perspective, I think all of you know he owns the NBA's Dallas Mavericks, serial entrepreneur, investor, TV star. So it's amazing that you're able to give us some time and hang out and talk through a few things. Appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
So as any good interviewer or moderator will do, they're going to make it about themselves. So let me just juxtapose myself and Mark here for about 30 years ago, I used to stay up at night and listen to my beloved Indiana Hoosiers on the radio.
Much better than Michigan.
Yeah. As a little kid living in the D.C. area, late night I could get over the air my Indiana games, so I could listen to my hero, Calbert Cheaney, win the National College Player of the Year. That was like 1993. Around that time, maybe a little bit before, a little after, Mark did the exact same thing in Dallas, but I guess he was a little further away, didn't have the same over-the-air bandwidth, and didn't get it on his radio. So he invented broadcast.com and made some money off of that. So I went to my fourth grade class the next day. He invented broadcast.com, and we're both here. So it worked out for all of us. So I wanted
I don't even know what broadcast.com is anymore. What we did, that was the start of the streaming industry. When I used to listen to games in Dallas and wanted to listen to Indiana University, I had to get a buddy in Bloomington, Indiana to put a radio next to a speakerphone, and then down in Dallas, we would have a 12-pack and a speakerphone, and we listened to games. And so that was right when the internet was just getting started. And so my buddies and I were like, there's got to be a better way. Let's see if we can make this internet thing work so we can listen to radio and eventually watch video. And we started doing homework, and we're like, you're crazy. We have radios. We have television. What do we need this internet for audio for? And I'm like, no, you don't get it. This is going to be really big someday. And so that's how the whole streaming industry got started.
So let's take a step back. As you look back at your career and all your successes, I want to go back to your upbringing, your childhood. What can you look to aspects of it that were most critical to your success now?
I mean, my dad did upholstery on cars. My mom did odd jobs. My mom was 20 when she had me. And so it was really just a family that was just trying to do their best. And I mean, I grew up, probably by the time I was 9 years old, I was hustling. I mean, I was selling baseball cards. When I was 12 years old, my dad used to have his buddies over to play poker. And I was always into basketball. And I was like, Dad, I want new basketball shoes. And he's like, those shoes look like they work. And he's like, when you have a job, you can buy whatever you want. And I'm like, I'm 12. And fortunately, his buddies probably had about 12 beers too many. And one of them said to me, you know what? I've got all these garbage bags that I need to get rid of. Why don't you go door to door and sell them? And I'm like, cool. And so I took these boxes of garbage bags. I'll never forget. There were 100 of them. He charged me $3. I sold them for $6, and it was really straightforward. It was like I'd go to my neighbors. Hi, I'm your neighbor, Mark. Do you use garbage bags? And who's going to say no to a lot younger face version? But it was there and then at 12 years old, literally, I realized that I could control my own destiny. If I could sell, and I could pretty much do anything I put my mind to, and that just gave me the confidence. And like I said, my dad did upholstery on cars, and he was always really, really clear that this is not a job I wanted you to do. Even though my mom wasn't quite so certain. Like when I was in high school, she wanted me to have a trade, and so she got a family friend to teach me how to install carpet, because she was really worried about me. And so if you're ever in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and you trip and the carpet's really nasty, that was mine.
Are there any specific inflection points along the way that you can speak to and say those were the moment, that moment really changed the tide for me or led?
Yeah, I mean, I got fired from it. Well, I got fired from a bunch of jobs, but I was working at a software company, and at this point in time, I was in Dallas, had just gotten to Dallas, and I was living 6 guys in a 3-bedroom apartment, sleeping on the floor. I didn't have my own bedroom, I didn't have my own bed, I didn't have my own closet, I just had a pile. And so I had a chance to close a big deal, and I went to the owner of the store, and I'm like, My normal job was to open up the store, sweep the carpets again, wipe down the windows, and make sure the store was open. And I'm like, his name is Michael Humecki, if you ever run into him. I'm like, Michael, I've got this chance to close a big deal. And he's like, no, you got to open up the store. And so I made the executive decision to go pick up a check because it was a $1,500 commission for me, thinking when I handed him the check, all would be okay. He needed the money as much as I did. Fired me on the spot. That led me into starting a company called Micro Solutions back when I was 24. And that was my first real company that turned into something.
So we're going to do something interactive a little later on in the interview, but I want to let you all know, if you have any questions for Mark, we're going to curate a few questions. You can ask them to hashtag SIS19 on Twitter, and we will choose a few at the end of this interview, so the audience has an opportunity to participate. Let's talk a little bit, let's move to kind of today. Shark Tank, that's a big deal. I was telling you before, I'm up late night with my wife, with our twins, and we watch a lot of that on CNBC. Appreciate you guys being on all night long. If you could transpose the Shark Tank model into social entrepreneurship, we have an unbelievable room of social impact leaders, social entrepreneurs. What would you do to transpose that model around the context of social entrepreneurship?
Well, first of all, people always ask me, why don't they do a Shark Tank for charities? And the answer is because you can't be mean to a charity. With all due respect with everybody here, not all charities are good. Not all charities get the job done. Not all charities live up to the expectations they set. And if you watch, anybody here watch the show, watch Shark Tank? What about the rest of you guys? Come on now. You realize that, at least I try to be brutally honest. Kevin, Mr. Wonderful, is just idiotic, but I try to be honest and open to people. And we would literally pick a charity apart, and to be on national television and have it, like you said, the reruns just run eternally, that would be brutal. So that's one thing. The second part, in terms of social components of companies, startups or otherwise, yes. One of the beautiful things we're seeing on Shark Tank now, particularly from younger entrepreneurs, Gen Z and millennials, is that almost all of them have a social component. That when people buy today, they don't want to just buy a brand. They want to buy from a company that they think is more than just a product. And so they're really, if you're starting a company, looking at investing in companies, you really have to have a social component. Who are you helping beyond yourself? What are you doing to make your brand stronger in the eyes of your consumers? And if you don't do it, when any of us go to make a decision and it's brand A or brand B, whether it's on Amazon, in a retail store, wherever it may be, which one are you going to choose? The one with or without a social component? And so it's almost a necessity if you're going to sell to a younger demographic.
And that makes me hopeful. You're seeing more of that, especially with Gen Zers and millennials, that they're building these businesses with the social.
Without question, because people today, kids today are growing up, like my oldest daughter is 15. That's an adventure. But, she's the first to tell me that, I've got to do more than just sell a product. I've got to do more than just, be a good product or be a brand that's being advertised. Like you saw with Lyft, who I was an investor in with John Zimmer, they're trying to be more. They're trying to have more of an impact. Because that's what, we're going through a crisis of capitalism versus socialism versus, and I don't even think it's real per se. I don't think socialism really is going to have an impact, but at the same time, it's being talked about and it's a valid discussion. But it's an opportunity for any of us as investors, as entrepreneurs, as business operators, or even as charities to send the message that capitalism can be compassionate. That there's more to being an entrepreneur and being a business owner than just maximizing how much you can put in the bank, because we're part of something bigger. The previous speaker that was up there, it was incredible hearing her talk about her family and honor. But I kept on thinking of her as an entrepreneur, right? She was taking a problem in terms of her honor and her community and her tribe and saying, how can I innovate to create change? That's what entrepreneurs do. When you start a company, your obligation, yes, is to survive and be successful. I remember the months when after I'd gotten fired and started my company, oh my God, I'm in business 1 month, 2 months. It's scary, it's freaky, it's hard. But if you recognize that you can be part of a bigger picture, you can do more, and you'll get more people to work with you. When I started, all the companies that I've literally started, you try to create a vision and demonstrate a vision. And when you're demonstrating that vision to not just your employees, but all stakeholders, customers, whoever, make it bigger. Send the message that you're willing to do more and have a greater impact, because we can affect change. I guess the other way to put it, why can't we affect change? Why can't it be you? Why can't it be any of us that go out there and make a difference? Because you can make a difference. You just have to be willing to take that responsibility.
So you've touched on some successes and some failures, but I want to dig in a little bit on that. You've said that your early success was about having nothing to lose. With a room full of entrepreneurs and dreamers and seekers, do you have what to say to them about finding success when maybe there is something to lose?
Of course you're going to, I don't want to curse, of course you're going to fail, right? Failure is part of being an entrepreneur. Failure is part of trying to create change. If it was just a straight line, if you just had a vision, if you had a dream, if you wanted to make an impact, and there was just a straight line, everything would be perfect for everybody. We just argue about who's perfect is more perfect. That's just not realistic. But the thing about failure is, of course you're going to learn from it, but it doesn't matter how many times you fail. There's no box score. There's no win-loss. I mean, I can tell you how many times I've gotten fired. I can tell you about my company for powdered milk. That was just ridiculous. I thought it was cheaper. It didn't matter if it tasted good or not, But it doesn't matter how many times you fail. You only have to be right one time. One time. One time. No one, if you look around, it doesn't matter. You don't know the failures of the people around you. You just know they've done something right and they were smart enough to be here today. But they don't keep a scorecard that says, boy, this business went bad, this charity didn't work, this investment went bad. The biggest investors, the biggest VCs are wrong 90% of the time. It doesn't matter how many times you fail. You just keep going, and you just got to be right once.
So we're here with an amazing group, as I said, of philanthropic and leaders, social entrepreneurs in philanthropy, community impact issues. What is motivating you right now?
There's so many inefficiencies in charity, and there's too many charities. And there should be a consolidation. There's the three people clapping. And it's hard to be brutally honest about it because everybody's got a personal story about why they started their charity, why they want to start their charity, why you should give them money. And it's so important to them, you can't really tell them no, or you can't tell them why it's a bad idea. But the reality is we waste I don't know how many tens of billions of dollars on overhead. And a couple sessions ago, they were talking about research and development and finally working together when it used to be so competitive. Well, the same thing happens in charities. There are 5, 6, 10, 20 charities for the same causes that compete with each other, and that's just ridiculous. And so, there's my partner from broadcast.com, Todd Wagner, runs Charity Buzz and Charity Network, and so we're working together to bring some of Wall Street. I know that's a terrible way to put it, and bring in analysts to come in and start taking an in-depth look at charities, not to rank them and rate them, but to do really in-depth write-ups about what they're doing. If they say they're going to build 30 houses, if they say they're going to house 50 people, if they say they're going to do X, did they do it? And so hopefully we'll be able to bring some efficiencies.
We've been talking a lot about tech for good also. I know we were talking about it before. You're bullish on AI. Can you speak about applications around AI for good?
Let me start with some background. I told you I got fired, started a company called Micro Solutions. And back then that was the start of the PC industry. And that was when you paid $500 for a spreadsheet, and it was crazy. And a PC cost $5,000 that had 20 megabytes of storage. And then we connected them together in local area networks, and that was a big deal. And that helped me create another business. And then we went to the internet, and I told you about streaming, and that was a big deal. Then we went mobile and wireless communication, and that's a big deal. And so here we are in 2019. And all of you have heard about artificial intelligence, maybe machine learning, neural networks. Maybe you do or maybe you don't understand it. But the impact of AI is going to dwarf all those previous things. Blows it away. There's no comparison. And the importance of that is, imagine now if you said to somebody, I don't know what the internet is and I don't care. Would that make any sense? Could you survive in business? Or if you said, you know what, I don't use mobile phones. Who needs them? Why would anybody use a mobile phone? I'll just go about my business. It sounds crazy. The same thing's going to be said about artificial intelligence. Now, what about why is that important? Well, as we gain experience in our lives, whether you're 22, 24, 94, we tend to use that experience in our businesses. And we really work hard to try to be good at something. You know, within your industry, you may be good at picking businesses. You know, you've reached some level of success by being good at something. And you use that experience to make your decisions. But what you can't do is take all data and look at all the data and look for repetitive patterns or look for things that you can't see. Right? Because no one can consume all data. Effectively, that's what AI does. You can just throw as much data of anything, and it'll look for correlations, it'll look for repetitive patterns, and it'll tell you things that you probably have missed. And that's important. So how is that applied? So if you're looking at, there's been a catastrophe, a disaster somewhere, and you're looking for the best way to rebuild a community. In the past, somebody who's done it before would come in and act as a consultant and tell you where to build the homes and the most cost-effective way to do it. And you just assume that's right, and you would hope it all would work, and then you'd hope everybody's happy with it when it's all said and done. That's so 2018. I'm dating myself, 19, bad habit. Why? Because with artificial intelligence, you can feed it just ungodly amounts of data so it can get to the point where it can pop out and say with a 93% probability, these are the best locations to build and these are the best types of homes to build within your given budget, and this is the best opportunity you'll have for the best outcomes. Because no 1, 2, 5, or 100 people can evaluate all potential outcomes. Artificial intelligence is going to be able to do that. Now, there's a lot of scary parts to it because the more data you feed it and it starts to recognize patterns in less and less amounts of data, it can do something called generalizing. Well, it'll start suggesting things you hadn't even thought about, right? Well, maybe in these homes you should, the first 6 should never be more than 1,600 square feet, and they should all have Shark Tank running. Who knows? But the point is that if you're going to have to start understanding what artificial intelligence is because it's going to impact your decision making, and if you don't, those people who have access to it and use it will have better data and probably make better decisions. Not always, but probably make better decisions than you. Look how it's being used in healthcare, right? I've got a company, Eon, that I invested in that is able to predict if someone has lung cancer and they're going through their chemo and everything, they're able to predict what comes next and when they might have another instance so hospitals can take the right course of action. I've got another company, Genesthesis, it's crazy. Every one of the bodies in our organs, every organ in our body emits an electrical pulse, or magnetic pulse actually, that can be recorded by a sensor. Now what they've done is take that output, that pulse, and saved it to an audio file, and they went to the Mayo Clinic and other hospitals and did it for the heart. So they had tens of thousands of audio files of this output from your heart. And then they compared that using machine learning to people who, from those outputs, who had different cardiac problems, right? Did they have AFib? Did they have pulmonary artery disease? Whatever it may be. And using that, now with this 5-minute sensor, they can predict with 94% accuracy what kind of heart disease you may have. Now, it's crazy because those of us, particularly men of a certain age, when you feel something in your chest, it's like, oh my God, what's going wrong? Do I go to the hospital? Do I go see a doctor? What do I do? Now, that all gets eliminated. So there are things that AI is doing that are changing the game, changing the world. They talked about research a couple panels ago, and they talked about the changes with cancer. A lot of that's driven in AI. They're able to recognize the impact of all these different variables and what different outcomes will be created. So what do you do and how do you deal with it? You've heard about AI. I'll tell you what I did, right? I mean, it's not like we all just grow up, oh, I already knew what AI was, I didn't have to study. I went to Amazon, AWS, set up an account and took the tutorials. I went on YouTube and said YouTube video, and it said videos that introduction to artificial intelligence, introduction to machine learning, introduction to neural networks. And I just started watching videos. I went to Coursera, Introduction to AI. I took the classes. It's time that's going to be well spent because if you don't know it, The person who does know it is going to have a competitive advantage over you. And if you're looking to invest, if you're an investor right now, you already know that everybody's telling you they're using AI. And 99.99% of it is BS. Because they really don't know. They're just, they're using someone who has a spreadsheet and says, this is AI. Oh, okay. So the point being, if you want to prepare yourself for the future, knowing AI and understanding the basic concepts so you understand the impact on your charity, your business, your investment, whatever it be, it's a necessity. It's not a maybe. It's a necessity. Otherwise, you're just going to be like that. We used to talk about people who were technology dinosaurs. They didn't want to use a computer, didn't want to understand the internet, didn't want to use a mobile phone and the mobile internet. You don't want to be that person.
So I want to pivot for a couple minutes before we go into audience questions to public policy, which may or may not be on your mind. The economy, specifically trade wars. Wanted to get your thoughts on trade wars and the impact on manufacturing and potentially job displacement.
Couple of questions there. First of all, tariffs. I don't think a lot of people realize that when one of my Shark Tank companies, Monkey Mats, right, imports these things that you use at the beach or on a picnic where it's just a mat and it's got weights and it's really cool and it sells for $29.95, but it got impacted by the tariffs. People don't realize that when you import a product from China, it's not China that pays the tariff. It's the company, the American company that's doing the importing. So when they talk about, well, all this money is going to the Treasury, yeah, there's money going to the Treasury to the tune of billions of dollars, but it's paid for by American companies, which is then passed on to consumers, which means all these tariffs are just a tax on American consumers. I think that's a bad idea. Now, if you want to fight China, and we can argue whether or not trade deficits are a big deal, I think whoever has more money spends more. The bigger country spends more. That's why we're at a trade deficit. But all that said, if we wanted to deal with China, if you look at companies here in the United States, Chinese companies that are on the American stock exchanges, their market caps are about $1.2 trillion. If you wanted to impact China, you hit them directly in the wallet, and President tweets, I might halt these Chinese companies based in America, they'll all freak out. If you say no more IPOs for Chinese companies, they're going to freak out even worse. I think that's going to get them to the table faster. Now, the side benefit of that is that tariff tax that we all pay, and the consumers who live, the people in this country who live hand to mouth and spend all their disposable income just to buy the goods that they need to live that happen to be important from China, they're not paying those taxes, those tariff taxes anymore. Us fat cats on Wall Street are the ones paying the taxes. Now, there's a downside. The value of those companies will go down. American stockholders that could get hit, so that's something to be considered, and you have to deal with that, and you have to address that in a variety of different ways. But that's one thing versus every single consumer who can't afford it being taxed. So I think we have to handle it dramatically differently.
On that note, one piece of advice if you could give to our current president, what would it be? We're going to turn to our audience questions.
Different fake tan.
I don't have attribution on this, so I apologize. Mr. Cuban, what are the top qualities in people or companies that you invest in?
Somebody who is willing to grinding. You got to be a grinder. Period. End of story. There's no shortcuts. You've got to be willing to put in the time. That's one. Two, you've got to be a learner. Here I am talking about artificial intelligence. The greatest skill an entrepreneur can have is knowing how being a grinder. The second best skill is being a learner. Everything changes every day, but the more you learn, the better knowledge you have about your industry in particular, the better advantage you have. And three, you've got to be a salesperson. If it's your company or you're running the company and you're not the most excited person to sell what you have, who is going to be? So if you have those three qualities, you've got a really good shot.
I'm reading these verbatim, so I know that. For Mark Cuban, Maverick of Innovation, what advice would you give your younger self?
Don't fuck it up.
Please ask at @mcuban, what would he do as president to end mass incarceration?
I think Van Jones is doing a great job. I mean, he's led the way, and I've done a lot to support him. I put my name on his letter, so I put Van in charge of that and let him do what he's doing.
There you go. All right, Van Jones, previous speaker here. We love that. What do you think are the top 2-3 issues that brands or companies need to be addressing in a bigger, bolder way in years to come?
I don't want to say brands, but just companies in general. I think you're going to have to figure out a way to pay everybody a living wage. I went through in the companies that I run, the companies I invest in, I don't have the control over, but the companies that I run, I wanted to make sure that nobody that worked for me was on public assistance, because to me, that's the most embarrassing thing ever. Now, I recognize if somebody's working 6 hours a week because that's all they can get out of the home because of healthcare and childcare, whatever it may be, that there's a possibility they could be on public assistance, just necessity of it all. But if you're working 40 hours or anywhere close, and you work for me, I screwed up. And so we went back and at the arena and other places and said, okay, we're going to give everybody raises. We might not implement it all in day one, but to get everybody to at least $15 an hour.
This is a good one. I wish sorry, go ahead. This is a fascinating exercise. I have all these questions coming at me. What's the biggest problem that can't be fixed with money?
The biggest problem that can't be fixed, compassion. Yeah, either you're there or you don't. I mean, there's, and health. I mean, look, look, our bodies, this is another business opportunity thing, if you will, but effectively our bodies are one big math equation. And every day, science advances a little bit further and technology advances a little bit further, we can identify more of who we are within that math equation. But unfortunately, some of us lose life's lottery, and whether, I always tell, my kids, I tell, when I have conversations like this, life is half random. Part you control, do your best. Parts of it we just don't control, and money can't change that.
This is an interesting one. Again, I wish we had attribution on these. How would you recommend combating imposter syndrome when entering a new field?
Imposter syndrome?
If you were that person, you can stand up and help me define that.
I mean, if you can get away with it, more power to you, I don't know. I have no clue.
Do you believe companies have a responsibility to stand up for what's right and support advocacy efforts, even when it runs risk of hurting profits?
Every company is in different stages in their life cycle, right? And so if you started a company and you're barely breaking even, don't worry about the advocacy. If you're a $17 billion, and when I say that, right, personally, do the right thing. If you're doing the right thing, inherently you're advocating and you're pushing things out the right way. At the Dallas Mavericks, I was an absentee owner in a lot of respects and screwed up big time. And we didn't have the diversity that was needed. And I learned a lot of lessons from that, but it allowed me to also recognize that diversity isn't just about checklists and having the right count of the right types of people, but it's about using it as a business opportunity. I mean, I was so stupid. I had 40-year-old white guys, or the Mavs had 40-year-old white guys trying to sell Mavs tickets to Hispanic women, thinking we were opening up new markets. It was just stupid. And what I recognized is I looked around and saw people who didn't look like me. They recognize markets that I don't get to see. They recognize consumers I don't understand. And I gave them the opportunity to create new business lines, do what they do, and gave them more carte blanche. And so it wasn't advocacy per se, but it went out and just by doing the right thing and learning from my mistakes, created new opportunities for me that also built more business that really supported those communities. And so I think when you do the right thing, you don't necessarily have to get out and advocate for big media type issues or big issues that people are talking about, but you build an underpinning, you build a platform for the right thing to happen, and that's what I try to do.
So, thank you. I said I was going to have a tough one for you. It actually came through from Sodman40 at Twitter, which is me. How are you going to return Indiana basketball to glory?
Yeah, if I knew it, I would have already done it. I have no clue. I have to worry about the Mavericks first, then I'll worry about IU.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Cuban, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. That was fun.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Excellent.